What kind of place is this?
Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you've spent the time between these two videos very well. I know that I have. Let me show you what I've been doing since last time you saw me. Do you remember from last video when I said that I was going to make a cool base on a planet? Do you remember when I said that it was going to be very, very good and to just trust that I was going to do something ridiculous? Well, here is my ridiculous base. It looks good, right? You might have noticed that something is wrong about my surroundings. You might think that I made this in space or in an asteroid field or something, but that's actually incorrect. This is a planet, more specifically a lightless planet, and this world is empty. I don't mean that it's an ocean or something vacuous like that. No, the entire planet has been mined out, background blocks and all. Yeah, that's what I've been doing. You might be asking yourself, why did you do this? This must have taken a tremendous amount of time. What the fuck, Grayson? To those people I respond with, why not? I've turned a planet without light into a planet without any solid matter as well. This planet is, for all intents and purposes, an abyss. Monsters and critters can't even spawn here because there's no ground to spawn on. Even ghosts can't spawn here because I have ghost immunity. Anyway, you might be wondering how I got here. Well, to get the whole story, I should probably rewind a little bit. The first thing I did before I tackled this project was upgrade my matter manipulator to a quantum manipulator. I mean, obviously, the better the manipulator, the easier this was going to be. Crafting it was relatively simple, requiring densinium, metallic hydrogen, and deuterium. Metallic hydrogen could be crafted in your lab with enough research, but yeah, fuck that recipe. We'll go ahead and just collect some from a gas giant. How hard could that be?
Drinking all suffering.
Yeah, that was an experience. I don't know why, but I immediately went insane upon teleporting down to the gas giant. Oh well, now we had plenty of metallic hydrogen, so whatever. Now we needed to turn it into liquid metallic hydrogen. This was the hardest part, unfortunately. You see, I stuck this stuff into an extractor and nothing happened. Centrifuge? Nope. Okay, maybe it needed to be smelted. It was metallic, right? I hadn't even set up blast furnaces at this point, and it was high time that I did so anyway, so I made a smelter and stuck in the metallic hydrogen. Still nothing. Alright, fine, wiki time. It needs an arc smelter? Ah, fuck. And the arc smelter itself is going to need pyrite and isogen. Alright, let's go ahead and handle densinium. I needed this for both the quantum manipulator and the arc smelter. This was a pretty rare ore, so rare that I hadn't even found any yet. They have a chance to appear in small quantities on cyber worlds, and rarely in even smaller quantities on gas giants and sulfuric planets, but I hadn't actually seen any of it so far. I hunted down some cyber worlds to see if I could find some, and I was pleasantly surprised. It's not common, but it's also not uncommon either. It's also sort of neat to hunt it down because you're able to see it through walls because it kind of emits this faint purple glow. I collected enough that I felt comfortable with, and then I headed home. Next, it was time to go find some pyrite and isogen. Now, pyrite is found on planets that are very hot, and isogen is found on planets that are very cold. Before I even set foot on one of these, I needed augments to protect myself against extreme heat and extreme cold, or I would be dead very quickly. After crafting the augments, I thought to myself, I should craft an EPP upgrade. I've been using the same EPP since the Arceus mining facility for over 40 hours of gameplay. So I saved up a bunch of research points and acquired the endgame EPP research. Then I saw the recipes and immediately went, no. Time to find some Infernus and Ice Waste planets. Infernus was, Infernus kinda sucked. There was so much lava in pockets underground that I kept falling into that for a brief moment I felt like I was kinda playing Minecraft. And the density of the pyrite was so small that I was getting frustrated until I dug into some kind of sub-biome, and I began to see massive veins of pyrite, and I felt very relieved. The ice wastes were arguably even worse. The planet wasn't as annoying to traverse, but the enemy spawn rate felt higher than it should have been. And, unlike the Infernus planet, when I got down deep enough, I found a fucking underground coral biome, like on an oceanic planet. I don't know why this is even in the roll table for sub-biomes on ice waste planets, but it really shouldn't be. Even worse, when I got through the coral biome, I did not find a biome full of isogen. I found a normal-ass nitrogen C core with zero isogen at all. So I had to go all the way back up to the top of the planet and mine the isogen that I needed. Luckily, I found a couple of burrowers that gave me a bunch of isogen ore, but still. I did not make out with nearly as much isogen ore as I did pyrite, and I spent over twice the time on the Ice Waste planet that I did on the Infernus planet. With those 2 ores out of the way, we could finally research an arc smelter. This thing was pretty handy, and while it did use a fair bit of electricity, it was able to smelt ores almost instantly with a chance to get a byproduct during the process. Very useful. And now we were able to stick our metallic hydrogen in there to get its liquid variant. Now we had all the tools we needed to research our quantum manipulator. God fucking damn it. While I was waiting for enough research points, I decided to start making progress into the main questline. I had already been spoiled on the wiki about the master manipulator being able to be repaired and used as the best manipulator in the entire game, so I wanted to spend some time getting that done instead of just waiting around or clearing challenge rooms. A part of me was actually going to be kind of upset if I managed to get my hands on the broken master manipulator before I had enough research points to research the quantum manipulator. It's not like it would have been a waste, obviously. All the shit I spent time unlocking and gathering would have still been useful at some point, but I still would have been slightly peeved, and yep, I totally finished the main story before I had enough research. Jesus Christ. After finally getting this thing into my hands, I felt giddy. This was a cool tool, and it was nice to know that I really didn't ever have to worry about a mining tool upgrade ever again. On to the second thing I wanted to handle, insanity. Our character is a little too sane for my tastes. It's time to start delving into some madness.
Okay, first of all...
Give it up, dude. You're arguing with a crazy person.
I'm not crazy. My mother had me tested.
The hardest hurdle on our path to insanity is this research milestone, the base metaphysics node. The reason for this is because madness is unlike any other currency in FRACKIN universe. It's not an easy thing to stockpile, contrary to what you might believe. The reason why is that madness will decay over time if you don't spend it, and this effect is amplified if you have any Protheon banked up. So it's a good idea to sell off all that Protheon before you start doing this. Now, we had a few options for our path to insanity. My favorite is just sitting in an Atropos biome and slowly going crazy that way, but the problem with this is that insanity status effects are kind of dangerous, and a lot more dangerous than you might think. It's not just creepy whispers in your ear and voices in your sail and letters floating around the screen, or the dance party music thundering in your head for minutes at a time. Sometimes the effects of insanity are physical, and it's kinda bullshit.
My spider senses are starting to tingle.
I need healing.
If you hold on to madness for a long enough period of time, you have a chance of getting one of the more severe effects of insanity, such as losing all of your HP except for 1 point, which is super dangerous if you're not paying attention, or even the ability to stop healing, period. Regen stops working, and first aid items don't do anything. This is arguably the worst effect that you can get, and it's absolutely dumb. It also doesn't make any sense. It's not like insane people in real life start vomiting blood and their skin refuses to stitch closed. First aid still fucking works on them. Also, let's go ahead and talk about the most annoying effect that you can get with insanity, poison clouds. What the fuck is this? Why was it added to the game? Why does it last 5 goddamn minutes? What is wrong with you, FRACKIN devs? Something else worth pointing out is that even if you do find a way to guard yourself against insanity, like an insanity shield augment, it doesn't work 100% of the time. It appears as if most of the negative status effects involving insanity are reduced or even nullified, but you still will get debuffs. Which only really affirmed my belief that I really should have been doing this earlier on to get it over with, and then never bother even touching madness ever again. Also, fun fact, even with an insanity shield, the toxic cloud effect can still happen to you, so that's fun. Anyway, the process to total insanity is a slow uphill spiral, and it was going to take some time, so we might as well enjoy the ride as best we can. How? By finding someone fun to hang out with. We might as well start getting involved with a certain interesting Montesi character at the Science Outpost. I'm sure some of you might know who this is, but in case you don't, this is Kevin. Kevin is an insane asshole. Everybody hates him. We were about to go do his entire questline because, fuck it, maybe he's just a misunderstood genius. Also, it's worth noting that you do get massive levels of madness as a quest reward when you do Kevin's quests, so that will help us out too. His quests start off semi-reasonable. Give him a piece of clothing because he wants to call somebody fat, give him some alien compound, that kind of thing. Then his questline takes a very drastic and sudden dark turn when he asks you for 200 baby heads on a stick. Now, this is the first I'd ever even heard of sticking baby heads onto a stick, let alone having such a high quantity of them. Luckily, the Florin vendor at the science outpost does sell baby heads on a stick. Where she gets them, I have no fucking clue. All I know is that Kevin wants to fit all these baby heads into a refrigerator, and when Overlord Kevin asks, he shall receive. Then Kevin asks for an orange, which actually stumps me. Oranges are really rare spawns on rainforest planets, but you can also buy one for an exorbitant sum of ancient essence. I'm not going to give up my essence that easily, so it was off to a rainforest planet to find some oranges. 6 hours and 3 rainforest planets later, and I had not found any goddamn oranges yet. So I wanted to invest in agriculture research to see if I could just breed an orange tree in my Xeno lab. Turns out that the developers either forgot to fucking add orange trees here, or they left them out on purpose because they hate me. So I bit the bullet and just bought the stupid orange and finished the quest. Then he asked for 20 plasmic crystals. Easy enough. And then Kevin hit me with a quest to collect 50 superior brains. Now, this is not an easy feat. The chance of getting the brains from enemies in general is already a coin flip, but the higher tier ones, that was even more rare. I think I had maybe 15 at this point, so this was just going to have to be a bit of a grind. The final quest of Kevin's was to bring him an anti-neutronium rod and a neutronium rod. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have access to these yet, so we were going to have to come back and finish up Kevin's questline later.
Because God has cursed me for my hubris, and my work is never finished.
We did get a fair amount of madness from his quest rewards, which did help, however, it was not nearly enough, so I needed to speed up this process. I tried buying drugs from a dealer at the science outpost and taking enough of them to kill a small elephant, but that was barely making a dent in what we needed. We needed to get into art. All of the great artists throughout history were batshit insane. Goya, Van Gogh, Doja Cat, all of them were pretty nuts. At this stage of the game, we were already harvesting brains and sticking them into jars, so it wasn't really a far cry to also start painting some eldritch abominations and keeping them next to my bed at night in order to accelerate our ascent into madness. To accomplish this, however, we needed to research canvas and then painting so that way we could build an easel. We needed a lot of dye for this, and we never actually really farmed petals, so I started stockpiling them and growing them in my hydroponic trays. We had enough dye to create about 6 inspired paintings, which apparently were like a loot crate that you popped open with the chance to get something Lovecraftian. I was severely disappointed that not a single one of the 6 paintings were madness-inducing, kind of a bummer, but we had plenty more dye on the way to try later. I did another 2 batches of 10 paintings each, so 20 total, and I felt content with the collection of eldritch paintings that we had. By now we had our Genesis research and Reality Bridge research done, which were the 2 main research nodes I needed in order to grow useful plants and to get anti-neutronium rods. What are anti-neutronium rods? Well, they're made out of opposing matter and particles that a neutronium rod is made out of, duh. Jokes aside, these 2 rods are very useful. You see, at this point I had been scouring precursor ruins for a pretty long time, and I had a handful of machines that I couldn't use because they required neutronium and anti-neutronium rods in order to start the process. They aren't really consumed during the operation, but they act as a sort of catalyst for the machine to run in the first place. The 2 machines in question are the precursor reactor and the duplicator. The reactor is, I think, the highest power gen in the game, creating up to 1,000 watts of power per second. However, this power threshold depends on what fuel you use in the reactor. In order to achieve that maximum 1000 watt output, you'd need to use fuels that aren't really renewable. So we were going to be using quantum fluid instead because we already had a shitload of it stockpiled. But I'm not going to do the reactor right now. The duplicator is a far more interesting piece of machinery. It allows you to literally clone items by feeding it mass amounts of fuel. Very useful. The list of items that I can duplicate isn't everything in the game, obviously, but it is pretty long, and it does include ingots and bars, along with stuff like superior fertilizer or even morphite. Now, this thing did eat a lot of energy, but if we focused on using it to create another pair of neutronium rods, we'd have a reactor up in no time. The wiki states that, first off, any valid ship fuel is valid in the duplicator, which is pretty neat. I'm not really sure why coal isn't a valid ship fuel. I guess space is run by libtards, but whatever, we can work around it. The second interesting point of information on the wiki is that the fuel cost for duplicating an item is equivalent to the pixel cost of the item you're duplicating, and any excess fuel that would be burnt basically results in a percentage chance to duplicate another copy of the item. So, for example, morphite has a pixel value of 410. This meant that I needed 410 fuel to duplicate it. Quantum fluid has a fuel value of 200. This meant that I burnt 3 quantum fluid per morphite, but I had a 5% chance to produce a second morphite during the duplication process. Mathematically, this formula generally favors using big-ass fuel items like the D-phase hydrogen cores, or the cat energy that we're not going to even talk about, but it's fine. We had infinite quantum fluid at this point, and this didn't really matter to us anyway. Also worth mentioning that now we had access to neutronium and antineutronium, we could finally finish up Kevin's questline by giving him a pair of these rods. Fun! Thanks for the, what the hell does this thing even do? This better not be another box of bees, Kevin. Whatever. Goodbye, Kevin. I hope that I stop seeing your face whenever I close my eyes. I also spent some time making the Genesis Berry and Neuropod seeds, which were pretty useful seeds. One of which jacked up our research point bonus for a little while, and the other one was a really strong healing item. Around this time, I finally had enough madness to finish the metaphysics tree completely. I spent some time waiting around for our madness to go down, so I did some idle tasks like upgrading all of our processing machines, building another arc smelter, etc. It was high time for another armor upgrade. I was using the Capture Not armor set at this point, and well, if you're not using pets, then it's kinda useless, so an upgrade was in order. The final tier of armor for Frackin Universe, at least the shit that we could craft using standard ores, was made out of etheric alloy, which was an alloy of solarium, densinium, and zithracite, none of which we had a ton of, so it was time to go mining. Now that we had plenty of the materials that we needed, we were able to make our nearly endgame armor. Actually, we're going to make 3 different armor sets right now. The Densinium set, the War Angel set, and the Type 3 Recon set. Trust me, this will make sense in a second. Under the Metaphysics research tree, we unlocked a new armor set with the Reality Bridge research called the EVA Densinium set. Now this set was a combination of the War Angel, Densinium, and Type 3 Recon armor, and it had the stats to match the resources needed to craft it. With our armor situation handled, I had a little mission to run real quick. I don't know if I mentioned this in the first episode, but there's actually a hidden room in the Dark Cave, the first dungeon that you probably did in Frackin Universe. You know, that cave that you entered the Ark from? On the planet with the mobile lab? Yeah, we were going to be heading back there, because I looked on the wiki and found out what's inside of the room, and I want it. Introducing the Atom Smasher.
None leave the slaughterhouse. Not alive.
The wiki says that it's so powerful that it's able to break even dead core blocks very easily. That sounds like something that I want. Now, the most difficult part about this recipe wasn't even all of the neutronium. I mean, that sucked, obviously. But the Elder artifacts that we needed were the most evasive of all. I don't think that I had even found one yet, and I had pillaged like 4 Elder biomes. So I looked at the wiki, and it said that these were only found in an instanced mission, the Delta Freya 2 mission, unlocked by finding a hidden book in the Baron's Keep quest. I wanted to go back to the Baron's Keep and prepare myself for what the wiki describes as the final level of Frackin Universe, and then I thought to myself, I should just save this for later. I didn't see any reason in rushing this right now. I had been spending the last 10 hours of gameplay preparing for this grand project, and it felt like I was putting it off until after I quote-unquote beat the game. Armed with the best manipulator in the game, endgame armor, and a hankering for destruction, we were finally prepared to obliterate an entire lightless planet. Now we just needed to find one. This might seem dumb, just look around, forehead, but lightless planets only spawn around black star systems, and apparently black star systems are pretty rare. It took me 10 minutes just to find one of these that had a lightless planet in it, and at that point I wasn't going to bother looking around for more. This was going to be our planet. Whatever it held, we were going to deal with. I landed on the planet and began walking in one direction, hoping to get a vibe for what I just signed myself up for. The first thing I noticed was the gravity rain, which made it very difficult to jump properly. The second thing I noticed was the ambient whispers. Fun! After realizing that it took 15 minutes just to walk the loop around the planet, I realized that I might have just bitten off more than I could chew. I contemplated finding a way to get rid of all the weather effects. They were a severe FPS drop, and they actually impacted my mobility, which was going to be a problem for this project. I decided to research terraforming, something that I had never done before. I had never actually played with terraformers ever, not even in vanilla Starbound. From what I understand, you build these, feed them a lot of ancient essence, and then they transform the planet into another biome, eventually transforming the entire planet into a new planet type entirely. It sounds useful, but how did it affect the weather? Unfortunately, weather pools are static across all planets. Specifically, they're static to the biome type. This meant that all lightless biomes were always going to have these weather types. I'm not really a fan of this actually. It'd be really cool if there was a way to remove weather patterns from a biome or add new patterns in, but whatever. First we needed to make a terraformer. We didn't have anywhere near enough ancient essence for this shit, so it was time to do a couple of ancient vaults. Then I did a vault and remembered why I fucking hated the endgame in vanilla Starbound, because vaults suck so much. The Guardian that I came across had complete invincibility until I got frustrated and googled why he was invincible, and then I read that he had to take his 2 adds, drag them into each other in order to create a projectile that, when it hits the boss properly, makes him vulnerable for a very short window of time.
Why?
Hey, just in case anyone wants to make a video game and is watching this is how you make a bad boss fight. I've yet to meet anyone alive that actually enjoys eye phases in a boss fight. Don't add them in, please. If you want the player to ever do a specific mechanic, make it obvious. Even then, don't make the boss completely fucking invulnerable to damage if the mechanic isn't done. If you want to make the boss resistant to damage, sure. Like 90% resistance to all damage is totally fine. But complete and total invincibility, it's bullshit and nobody likes it. Stop doing it, game developers. You would imagine that some of you would actually play your own fucking game at some point and realize that this shit is not fun, but I guess none of you actually QA test your own fucking game, so I had to state this out loud for everyone to hear. After clearing the vault and crafting a lightless terraformer, we could finally figure out how to use these things. I stuck a bunch of essence in, and then I waited. The result was that a few of the microbiomes on the surface of the planet were transformed into the lightless biome. Cool, I guess. It's not really what I was going for, but since we were stuck with the weather pattern, there wasn't much else that I could do. And now we breach upon the million-dollar question. What's the best way to strip mine an entire planet? Do we go straight down in columns? Do we go in rows? There are a few videos of this being done in vanilla Starbound in the past, and I actually like this guy's method of just going horizontally across the surface of the planet, and then using platforms to both maintain a staircase for yourself, and to fill in any gaps in the floor as you go along in mine. Now, this guy only did foreground blocks, not background blocks, but he was also playing in vanilla almost a decade ago. In FRACKIN universe today, we have access to far superior mining tools, so I don't think this will be a problem.
Future!
Finally, I just grabbed my crewmates and my wraith pets, and I got to mining. The hardest part of this process was just starting somewhere. Honestly, that's the hardest part of most things. Start. The first step. I set up a platform with a teleporter and a few 300-slot shipping containers on it for all the blocks that we were about to get, and with a heavy sigh, I picked up the shovel, figuratively, and got to work. And then I was almost immediately derailed. About 20 minutes or so into the mining process, I came across this fucking thing. I assume these are elder ruins or something. I spent a few minutes looking around for a field generator so I could break it, but I can't seem to find one. I was absolutely floored by this realization. Is this a thing? Do the FRACKIN devs really just add indestructible fucking structures onto planets? Really? Alright, breathe and relax, it's fine. This is a good thing. This means that we could abandon this planet and find a better one and then just terraform it into lightless later. What does this mean? It means that I can be picky about what I want in a home planet. Ideally, the smaller the planet the better, I don't really want to mine forever. Something relatively high tier for the research point bonus would be good. And what about the core? Normally, I wouldn't really give a shit about the core, but what if we found something useful? What's the most useful liquid that we have? Liquid iridium. Now, I already found a liquid iridium core underneath a strange sea planet a while ago, but for obvious reasons, that's not really going to work, is it? However, you can actually roll liquid iridium on non-ocean planets. Technically speaking, super dense and shadow planets can both roll a liquid iridium core. This would be the ideal planet for us, right? Because then we could just transform it into a lightless planet. Having a new goal in mind, I set out for the universe to look for shadow planets. You might be asking, why not a super dense? And I feel like that question kind of answers itself. Low gravity planets are a lot more fun, and they're also easier to live on. I can't adjust the gravity on a planet like I could on a space station, so not living on a super dense would be ideal. So what are we looking for? Ideally, a high-tier shadow planet with a liquid uranium core. Easy enough, right? Yeah, no. It turns out that these goddamn things are a lot more rare than I first thought. Full disclosure, I did not record this process. You're gonna understand later on that my mental state at this point was actually slowly unraveling, so I'll just use that as an excuse. I scoured probably 20 or so different star systems, black star systems specifically, because those were the only ones that could hold shadow planets. After tunneling through roughly 40 or so shadow planets on my first day with no fucking uranium core, I was starting to wonder if the goddamn wiki was lying to me. I even double checked using the Wikipedia, and yes, shadow worlds can roll a liquid uranium core. I went to bed with a frown on my face and picked up where I left off the next morning. On the second day, another 6 hours and roughly 100 planets later, I was starting to actually go insane. I was beginning to sing along to the music that I was blasting in my headphones, which is how you know I'm either sleep deprived or I'm going crazy. Or both. I went to bed growing increasingly frustrated. On the third day, and another 6 hours of searching later, I was beginning to get sick of playing STARBOUND. At this point, I had just spent the past 2 days of my life digging down in a video game and being disappointed when I didn't find what I was looking for. At this stage, I was wondering if I even wanted to fucking do this anymore. This obviously wasn't working because I had tunneled into well over 200 different planets and still hadn't found liquid uranium. Then I found a black star system with 4 shadow planets on it. I thought to myself, if none of these 4 planets have it, I'm done. If these didn't have it, I would just have to do something else interesting for you guys to watch me do. First planet, dead core. Second planet, bio-ooze. Third planet, liquid protocyte. My last planet, my last chance before I gave up. I entered the core of the 4th planet, and then I saw blue liquid. My heart began racing. I kept digging. I found the core of the planet, and finally, after 20 hours of searching, it's fucking liquid uranium. I was so goddamn happy, you have no idea that I could finally stop looking. It was like finding an oasis in the desert after seeing nothing but heat mirages and liquid protocyte for days. I toured the top of the planet looking for anything like the ruins that were indestructible on our last candidate. It looked like we had 2 dungeons, one Apex and one Avian. The Apex one had a shield generator, but I cleared it with no problems. The Avian one didn't even have a shield, so we were set on not having any bullshit structures that we couldn't clear. Awesome. However, not awesome, it seemed as if the weather was still going to present to us a problem that we needed to solve. The blue and orange grav rain were still incredibly annoying, but I would deal with that later. For now, it was time to dig. So let's talk about the process and what I learned as I went through the effort of mining out an entire planet. The first thing I want to point out is how I divided this project up. You see, I'm running a mod called Planet Info, and that allows me to see biomes and sub-biomes on a planet whenever I'm looking at it in the navigation menu on my ship. However, I can also see how big a planet is on this screen. This planet was classified as a size 8, otherwise known as medium, and it even tells you that this thing was made up of roughly 4,000 by 3,000 blocks. Now, it's not as if the planet was solid, obviously, but if you assume that at least 50% of the planet is solid and not air or liquid, that's still a lot of blocks to mine through. The other reason why this information is useful is because these numbers allow me to gauge, roughly, how many pass-throughs of the planet that I would need to complete horizontally, what I call laps. A lap is quite literally a lap around the planet, where I dig down 13 blocks and start a new row being cleared out. Our master manipulator, maxed out, had a mining area of 13 by 13 blocks. If the planet was allegedly 3,000 blocks tall, that meant that we were going to have to run roughly 231 laps around the planet. Now, the normal Starbounder wiki states that on medium-sized planets, the terrain level actually only starts at roughly the Y level 1400, which meant that I would actually only have to complete 108 laps. I timed myself running a lap, and though this would obviously change throughout the planet, the first couple of laps that I did had an average time of 15 minutes. This meant that I could run 4 laps an hour, which also meant that this whole project was going to take me roughly 27 hours. Fucking hell. I needed to speed this up somehow. I did not want to spend 30 hours on this. The first thing I did was speed up how fast that I was able to clear laps. At first, I was just walking along, fighting monsters off, that kind of shit. Eventually, I stopped using platforms entirely. Instead, I just used a dash tech to leap over gaps. This saved me a tremendous amount of time and cut my average time of 15 minutes down to roughly 8 minutes. Much faster. I also moved my shipping crates and all my other stuff above ground down to my temporary platform, allowing me to not worry about expanding the top platform down to my level as I went, also saving me more time. Something else worth talking about was how I was going to address the weather, and I think I found our solution. You see, barren planets are boring for a lot of reasons, one of which was their weather, which also made them unique. Barren planets have zero weather patterns. It's always 100% clear with no weather whatsoever. I wanted to see if I could terraform the planet into barren, at least during the mining process, to make my job even slightly easier. I went to an ancient vault to craft a terraformer, and barren terraformers don't exist. That's no, it's fine. That's not incredibly infuriating at all. Oh look, there's a mod in the workshop that adds a barren terraformer to the game. Fantastic. I don't know why the STARBOUND devs couldn't be fucking bothered to do this themselves, but here we are. Fine, another vault run later, and we got our barren terraformer. Great, now we don't have to worry about the weather while we complete our task. Also worth noting is that barren planets don't have monsters on the surface. They might have burrowers or other monsters in the underground, but the surface was completely peaceful. Another useful feature. Then I kept digging. About 6 or so hours into the process, I had a thought. Well, actually I had a lot of thoughts, but this one wasn't absolute nonsense, so I did entertain it. What if there was a faster way to do this? Vehicles were out, as you can't mine from inside of a hover bike or even one of the new FRACKIN universe vehicles. Mechs? Nah, it's faster to mine via the manipulator. It was a decent idea, but even with the highest tier mech legs, boosters, and mining tools, I still think that using our manipulator in a 13x13 pattern across the surface of the planet was much faster than using a mech could ever be. The next thought I had was about bombs. Explosives, boom booms.
Well, as far as me goes, I just like to blow things up.
The strongest bomb in FRACKIN universe is a neutron bomb, comprised of state phase gel, 1 neutronium rod, and 1 anti-neutronium rod. Now we only had about 8 of these rod pairs each, and I need to save a pair for my precursor reactor, so we were only able to craft 7 neutron bombs. The wiki states that these guys have a range that is comparable to an entire surface level Hylodal Castle dungeon. That sounds like roughly 200 blocks or so in a radius around the bomb, give or take. So I dug 200 blocks down, tossed a neutron bomb out, and I booked it. I walked about a screen length away, and I waited. After about half a minute, I thought that the bomb didn't go off, kind of a scary thought, so I walked over reluctantly to the bomb, and then I realized it did go off, it just wasn't that strong.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
The wiki seems to have vastly overstated how destructive this thing was. Well, maybe that one was a dud. Let's go ahead and try one more time. This time, let's go ahead and try to keep the bomb on screen. Oh, that is much better. I guess the first one wasn't detonating properly because I walked too far away from the core of the bomb and it wasn't able to load in these explosive projectiles. That's my best guess. Anyway, that was destructive enough for me that I went ahead and crafted 20 more. One of the minor downsides of the bomb was that it destroyed blocks. This wasn't much of an issue for me, I didn't really care about all the blocks that I was mining anyway. I was really only going to collect them and process them for literally no other reason than unnecessary greed. I did like the neutron bombs, but I also disliked the neutron bombs. They'd be significantly more useful if their explosion was just a massive radius and I didn't need to wait around for the little explosions to do their work. One big bomb, I watch it detonate, and then I move on. Done. That would be ideal. Also, these things were really expensive. Remember, each of these bombs takes a pair of neutronium rods, and that required a whole suite of materials like dark matter, red matter, etc. In any case, the bombs were not going to be a long-term solution. They definitely did speed up how fast I'm clearing, that much is not being debated, but they were not going to be our solution, unfortunately. No, this project just really needed some good old-fashioned elbow grease and mindless labor. After my short vacation with explosives, I went back to mining in rows. I didn't record much of this process, this was pretty boring, and I didn't want to turn a 30-hour gameplay project into a time-lapse anyway, that would be kind of ridiculous.
3 days later.
Another 3 days later, and I was towards the end of the process. I could feel that I had about 15% of the planet left, so I trudged forward, hoping that this would be done soon. This is also when I started recording again. Something to point out in case you were wondering what these giant piles of sand are, apparently when bio-ooze and liquid uranium touch each other, it creates a block of rainbow sand. Normally I would happily take the rainbow sand because it is kind of useful when extracted, but it was pretty annoying to have to swim down into the core and clean this shit up, and I'm sure I missed sections of it somewhere. But anyway, now we were done. Finally. I mentioned that this took 5 days with me averaging roughly 4 hours per day, so about 20 hours total of game time. Definitely took longer than I first thought, and I could only imagine how much worse it would have been if this were a planet larger than medium, like huge or even immense. What an absolute unit. Now it was time to terraform the planet back into lightless. The barren terraformer had served its purpose, but now we were going for aesthetics. What the fuck? These have to be operated on the surface of a planet? That's... You know what, I'm not even surprised. Given how stupid these goddamn things are, and what an insane inconvenience they are to operate, it's not out of the character for them to have dumbass restrictions like having to be on the surface of a planet. I created a pillar all the way back up to the surface, because we had no surface of a planet anymore, and began terraforming our masterpiece back into a lightless void. While we're traveling upwards, likely for the last time on this planet, I should answer some of the questions that some of you might have about how this world behaves. First off, I could still hear biome music changes as we pillared upwards, so it seems like biomes are stationary, and not at all based on what blocks are present, unlike a game such as Terraria, where you are able to create artificial biomes by simply placing enough of a specific block type down. Second off, while rare, enemies could still spawn. Specifically, enemies that can fly are able to spawn, and the only biome that had flying enemies on this planet were the underground flesh biome. So as long as I didn't build anything near one of those, I wouldn't have to worry about monsters. I will say that I'm interested in the spawn mechanics of those enemies because I've never played a game where an enemy can just spawn in a void. Even Minecraft forces enemies to spawn on a solid block. Lastly, yes, I was in fact incredibly cautious about dismantling our temporary base of operations near the core of the planet, because I didn't really have a way to place down blocks in the event that something happened to this thing. And if I lost my way to place blocks here, I think I might actually fucking lose my mind. Speaking of bases, it was time to build ours. The first thing we did was build a safe section for our teleporter because I was still on edge about losing any block foothold. And the next thing we did was build out the liquid uranium processing facility. This would be the section of the base that was dedicated to using pumps and siphoning liquid uranium from the core and transferring them into Arceus converters. I built this first because these guys process quantum fluid very slowly, so I might as well let these guys work while I build the rest of the base. Now, we needed to figure out a ratio of converters to pumps because I didn't really want to overstock on uranium, but I definitely needed enough to keep all my converters running 100% of the time. Now, we could do a bit of math to figure this out. Densinium pumps pumped at a rate of 10 units per second. We had 8 Arceus converters. One Arceus converter converted 80 liquid uranium into 1 unit of quantum fluid every 50 seconds. 80 units over 50 seconds is 1.6 units per second, which means that a converter needed 1.6 liquid uranium per second. With 8 converters, this equated to 12.8 liquid uranium per second. This meant that I needed at least 2 densinium pumps, or at least 1 densinium pump and 1 iron pump. I opted for 2 densinium. Normally, I'd be a little bit concerned about overstocking, but with this much of a buffer, I don't think it'll be that much of a problem. It's a 300 slot fuel container, plus the internal container of the pumps. With 7 extra liquid uranium per second, 420 per minute, hell yeah, 420 blaze it, which means 25,000 per hour, it would take roughly 9 hours of idling before this thing filled up full. That's a pretty generous amount of storage before anything went wrong. And I could always take the overstock out every few hours and stick it into a duplicator or something, or stick it into my ship as a fuel source. I had options, this was not going to be a problem. The rest of the base was relatively straightforward, as they basically just transferred everything down from the space station. I set up our precursor reactor, and even got to making some more batteries to hold all of our newfound electricity and power our processing machines. On the topic of processing machines, we were far overdue for full-scale automation. The fact that, until now, I have still been manually inserting stuff into my machines and taking them out by hand was not acceptable. So I decided to buckle down and start the process of automating as much of these machines as I could. I gotta be honest with you, ITDs kinda suck. I love these guys, but holy shit are they incredibly limiting and kind of dumb at the same time. What's that? Your exporter ITD is taking your output from your precursor forges, another item that we should be able to craft by the way, stupid that we can't, but somehow isn't allowing your input chest to input into these machines? Well, have you tried removing the output configuration where you told the ITD to not export the first 2 slots of the machine, and then instead configured the ITD to not import the first 2 slots of the machine, and then just inverted the logic? Why does that suddenly work perfectly fine now? It's the same fucking configuration. Well, how does any of this shit work? Does anyone actually know? Because I sure as hell don't. What's that? You wanted a single output chest for all your machines? Well, you're going to need multiple ITDs for that instead of just one, because each machine needs to have an export ITD configured very carefully so that you aren't exporting input slots and that you're exporting all of your machine's output slots, and the two aren't mutually exclusive across all the different machines in your lab, because fuck you, that's why. Why can't all the endgame machines have the same number of input slots so that way this process would be 10 times easier? Because fuck you, that's why. What's that? You want to automate the process of sending ore from your output chest back up to your smelters? Go fuck yourself. All arc smelter recipes require 2 ore, or else they get clogged and won't process anything else until they get an even number of that ore type. And guess what? There's no way to configure an ITD to only export an even number of items. Your only option is to set them to only transfer a full item stack, but that's also not efficient, because then you could have a stack of 998 ore sitting in a chest, waiting forever until it receives 2 more ore and becomes a full stack. And don't even get me started on the extractors. These goddamn things need 50 of a block type to process the blocks, so you have to configure the ITD to only export item stacks, or else you need to specifically count in multiples of 50 to make sure that nothing clogs. This entire system, all this automation, is not user intuitive. What I don't get is why the ITD does not have a way to configure specific transferal details like the number of items that it's able to move per second, or why all the different processing machines don't have the same number of input slots to make this entire system more manageable. I'm going to be honest with you, a machine doesn't need more than one input slot, it just doesn't. It's not as if the machine can process multiple slots at once, it still only processes one slot at a time. Frackin' devs, just make every machine have one input slot, please. It would be way easier for automation. Again, this entire system is very useful once you figure it out and get it working, but it sure is a fucking hassle to get it rolling, isn't it? Hence why I said that I both love ITDs and hate them at the same time. Anyway, I'd love to end the video now, but I don't want to end on a sour note like this, so I'm going to go ahead and run the Delta Freya Tomb instance mission for shits and giggles. I really want the Atom Smasher, so I do need those Elder Artifacts. I went to the Baron's Keep, found the hidden book somehow, unlocked the mission, and prepared myself for, again, what the Frackin wiki called the final mission of Frackin Universe. You are first greeted by our friend, the sluggy scientist Vinaliz? I don't know how to pronounce that name. Anyway, he tells you that while he's on vacation, he can't neglect his duties as a director. Director of what? Does this guy have lore that I don't know about? I don't remember him claiming to be a director of anything when we met him on our starter planet. Unless this isn't the same sluggy boy that we met on our starter planet? Frackin devs don't seem to be very good at creating lore for their characters. Anyway, whoever this guy is, he tells you that they lost contact with this outpost and that the weather might be affecting his communications with you. I broke into the research base only to find blood on the walls, corpses and remains lying around, and obvious elder corruption present in the walls. Slug Boy starts to vomit, I guess he's never seen blood before. We turn on the lights so that we can see properly, and find a scientist with tentacles growing out of his head, who Slug Boy recognizes and asks you to put him out of his misery. After this, instead of offering you to leave, Slug Boy insists that you keep investigating so that this never happens again. And while he's insistent that he would never let this happen again, it's pretty easy to say shit like that when you aren't actually on the ground fighting off eldritch monsters, so Slug Boy's kind of a bitch. He says that the storm is getting worse and to take shelter in the cliffs up ahead, but I opt to shrink down using my microsphere tech and explore the area beneath the water, finding a path leading into some elder ruins. This is where the mission gets fun. I fight some tentacled enemies who I find out are extremely resistant to cosmic damage. Now that might be a problem when half of my weapons only deal cosmic damage. This is called foreshadowing.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
But after the enemies die, I find a statue that holds an Elder Artifact. Phenomenal. Now I just need to find one more for the Atom Smasher. Now the rest of the dungeon is actually kind of boring. There's a few puzzles, most of them are pretty mundane. The only really annoying one is at the end of the dungeon, right before the boss, but we'll go ahead and talk about that in a minute. Most of this dungeon is just complicated backtracking. Based on my last episode, we all know how I feel about this. This dungeon isn't nearly as bad as the Precursor ruins when it comes to how insanely convoluted it is, which really just means that the Precursors were somehow worse at building shit than the Elders are, but I digress. fight eldritch abominations and fish monsters, solve a puzzle of some kind, and move on. It's very Skyrim-esque, and it's really nothing to write home about. A lot of this dungeon felt like kind of like going through the black books in Skyrim and dealing with Hermaeus Mora's Daedric realm, the Apocrypha. It's not bad, it's just that there wasn't anything super riveting here, unfortunately. Honestly, I would have added something like a custom Arceus ghost that chases you throughout the level to make things more interesting. I don't know. Your sail will stop displaying messages from Slugboy because you've lost contact with him, and instead will show some Cthulhu motherfucker speaking in, what did H.P. Lovecraft call this language? Rylian? I love how Lovecraft described the language as guttural and impossible for humans to pronounce, and yet there are still people who spend insane amounts of time attempting to translate the language into something usable. Anyway, there's a mini-boss that actually looks pretty cool called the Starspawn Acolyte, though he did get stun-locked by me and my crewmates and died in seconds, so the fight wasn't that great. And then we come across the liquid puzzle. This puzzle requires you to pull different switches in order to get a liquid to move from here to here. It's incredibly ridiculous and convoluted and really is just a massive waste of time. But once the puzzle is cleared, you do get to the final room with the boss in it. Now, this room is basically just a massively long hallway with pillars and other blocks in the way, along with a few enemies, but once you reach the end, you find the boss of this dungeon, Shogoth, the Formless Horror. The fight itself isn't that hard, we're basically immortal because we're using an armor set with automatic on it, but that doesn't mean that the boss isn't incredibly resistant to all forms of our damage because I didn't bring anything except raw damage or cosmic damage. This fight took, and I'm not joking, 14 minutes to clear. The Shogoth couldn't kill any of us because my field medic was able to heal herself faster than the Shogoth could damage her, even when he did his big laser beam attack. At some point during the fight, I realized that I had picked up a tome of poison spells from the dungeon, so I pulled that out to try to deal some more damage a bit faster, but the fight itself was still incredibly tedious and was more of a battle of attrition than a battle of skill. Once the Shogoth was dead, it dropped something called Shogoth flesh, tasty, and we get a message from Slugboy who thought that we were dead. And then we loot the final chest and head home. All in all, not a bad dungeon, and definitely not as bad as some of the other instance content that I've come across before this. But I noticed that we still only had one Elder artifact, and I needed 2 for my Atom Smasher, so I would need to run Delta Freya 2 again in order to complete my weapon. However, that would be a task for the next episode. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video. The next episode is likely going to be the last one, sort of a finale/epilogue of sorts, so look forward to that soon.